This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. My new book about addictions, All the Way Home, Building Recovery That Works. You basically cannot open any newspaper, whether local, national, or international, that doesn't focus on Vancouver housing issues. Who's buying all these houses? How much are they paying? How are they getting away with it? Should we tax them? For my money, I don't have much, nobody has yet said what the reality is. But every columnist and every scribe is writing about housing almost daily. Well, we've come to the right guy to find out the truth, and that is our old buddy Mario Canseco, the vice president of Insights West, the polling company. Mario, first of all, welcome, and you set a new record for the D. Berner show. I think you're the only guest we've had on 3 times.
This is my third, yes.
Yeah, that's great. So, what is it really? I mean, I'm sure you've done some testing on these issues. What are you finding out?
Well, before the last municipal election, we asked a large number of residents in Metro Vancouver what the number one issue was. And obviously, Surrey was very concerned about crime, and they still are. But in Vancouver, housing was the number one issue by a lot. Almost half of residents saying housing is the issue. Housing is this is something that needs to be dealt with soon. And what is interesting to us is looking at the numbers, it's the 18 to 34 demographic. They are the ones who are looking for a place to buy, maybe looking for something down the road, and they are really disappointed with the fact that if they don't have $1 million in the bank, it's pretty difficult to buy a house in the city.
Absolutely, and even with $1 million, what do you get? A fixer-upper.
Yeah, and this is one of the difficulties for the government, in my view. When they won their first mandate back in 2008, they really had a lot of voters who were 18 to 34, who were looking at life differently. Maybe they rode a bike to school. They are now older. They may have a wife and a child and a car seat, and maybe they're not using their own bikes anymore. They're changing the way that they look at the city. Now they need some help with the housing issue, and I don't think they're really satisfied with the answers that they're getting from their government.
Well, Mayor Moonbeam sends a letter and makes it public, sends a letter to the Premier saying, you better fix up housing. Basically, that's what he said. And basically, she sent back a note saying, excuse me, are you kidding me? And of course, as usual with all governments, it's the other government that's supposed to be doing something. But in all honesty, what is any government capable of doing about this issue in this moment in time in this city?
Well, I think one of the ways to start this actual conversation would be to talk about the realities on the ground. How many people have a house in the city that nobody lives in?
Yes.
Which is something that we cannot collect, apparently. The other thing that has really muddled the waters on this is the fact that Bob Rainey has anointed himself as the savior of this cause, as the person who is the thought leader on this, which is quite bizarre. When I was asked about it a few weeks ago, I said that it would be like the CEO of McDonald's, saying not only that hamburgers are really good for you, but they're also the only thing you can afford.
Yeah, exactly.
And it really made a lot of people uneasy with this. I think there's many residents who want to see some action on this, and they don't want to see it from the person who is bankrolling the campaigns of the mayor and the premier.
The very fact that Bob has made himself a multimillionaire out of selling things at the highest possible price should automatically preclude him from having a useful opinion on this subject.
Yes.
He knows how to work the market. Mazel tov, congratulations, good for you, Bob. But that doesn't mean that helps anybody else.
Well, what is quite shocking to me, I came to this country when I was in my late 20s.
Yes.
With my wife, we had a little bit of student debt, but nobody saw us and told us, you know what? all these things that you want to have down the road are not going to be there for you. You should stay here, buy a small condo, because that's life.
Yes.
And this is a generation that lives in the city who voted for Mayor Robertson. And they are now being told that all they can afford is a box somewhere in the city, and that they should give up on their dreams of owning a house.
And it's
it just doesn't make sense to me.
It's a two-bedroom box of 460 square feet, which is roughly the same size as a king-size hotel room.
Yes, and
What a gift.
Maybe one day we'll move into those Tokyo-style hotels for executives where you walk into this kind of dock and
Which is kind of like a morgue. They slip you into the slot, yeah.
they will find a way to do it. And it's really disappointing because what you see there is an issue that a lot of people struggle with. You have a mortgage, you want to do something different, you want to pay, you want to move up in the market. It's something that we're told is one of life's greatest accomplishments. You buy a house of your own.
Basic move in life.
Yes, exactly, almost like finishing school.
Yeah.
And now we have a situation where nobody wants to talk about this, and it's almost as if you're lowering the bar. This is the reality of the city. You don't like it, move to the suburbs. Well, if the entire base of the mayor moves to the suburbs, he's not winning any election anymore.
Let's talk about, there are some things that I think can be done, but they don't have to do really with the whole issue of foreign ownership. Yes, we could have more density in some districts, and that doesn't mean 34-story towers. It just means allowing townhouses or row houses. It means all kinds of things that wouldn't be horribly disruptive if the neighborhood would accept it. There are some things we could do, but I don't believe that's going to bring the price down.
No, and one of the reasons for it is that the owners tend to be happy with what is happening around them.
Well, of course.
Suddenly, your house is worth $100,000 to $200,000 more because somebody moved in next door and paid more than you did.
How can you establish a law? I'm asking a rhetorical question, obviously. How can you establish a law that says no bidding wars on a condo or on a house?
It's impossible.
You cannot.
It's impossible. And this is one of the problems with some of the solutions that have been discussed.
Yes.
Let's do something to stop people from flipping. Well, what do you consider flipping? Maybe something happened in your life and you need to sell the house. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing this just because you want to.
It may be
make
possible that a real estate agent who has a client who's selling a property, let's say a house, it may be possible that he or she makes up a phantom higher bid. If that's possible, and no doubt it happens because corruption exists at all levels of everything. But that's not even, what are you going to do? You're going to, would you do all the real estate agents in Vancouver have to show pieces of paper that these are, so they'll get their cousin to sign the bid. And that's not something that can be policed. We can't police these comical so-called medical marijuana shops. How are we going to police that?
Well, and it's also part of the disenchantment with the city in a way. Because,
how so?
Because what it does is it establishes a scenario where if you're starting out, the message that has been sent by the city and by the government that you elected is that there's no place here for you. Unless you can afford this, unless you want to, settle into something that is far from the dream that you had when you came to this country, in my case, or when you became somebody who was working and who was earning a salary. They're essentially telling you, if you don't like this, if you want to have a house, move to the suburbs.
What are you getting from the public in terms of tax non-resident ownership or tax foreign ownership? My sense is that'll never happen. But you're the guy with the pulse. Well, what?
They're very supportive of it. And,
really?
Oh, yeah, and we've seen it a couple of times. We asked about it before the last municipal election. Support was nearly 70%. We asked again earlier this year, and support for the idea continues to be high. I think part of the problem is you look at it from the standpoint of other cities. New York has this idea of implementing a tax on any property that is worth more than $5 million, which is essentially every penthouse in Manhattan.
Right.
And it makes sense. If you're not living there for 6 months, you have to pay a tax because you're not contributing to New York City by going out and having coffee and going to see the Yankees, whatever it is. So that idea seems to be working there. Of course, this is a very different city. But when you see other cities doing this, you're starting to figure it out and say, why can't we do anything like that? We can't because we don't even have access to the data. We don't even know how many homes are empty.
So here's my take on this. We got 3-4 minutes to break. Here's my take on this whole issue. we can do nothing about this. I believe we can do nothing, and all this noise is just noise, it's just posturing. And here's why we can do nothing, because it has nothing to do with Vancouver. It originates in a country with 1.5 billion people. So if I live in Shanghai and I do well in business, I do very well because I have this giant market. So we have a lot of people, mostly, I'm talking about mostly in mainland China, who have made a lot of money. And so they come to Vancouver and they buy a house. Many of them live in these houses. They don't disappear. They buy a house. I spoke to a real estate agent 20 years ago who, when I said the word mortgage, she looked at me arrogantly and said, "My clients don't have mortgages." And she was a Mandarin-speaking Chinese from PRC. So people come here with lots of money and they raise the price. And I don't believe there's a thing we can do about that. It may not be pleasant, but and I'm not saying we should just throw up our hands, but I don't think, unless you want to go and restructure a country thousands of kilometers from here, good luck.
A lot of people have tried.
Yeah.
Richard Nixon.
Yeah, so what do you make of my take on this?
It's a chicken and egg thing as well, because it seems to be welcomed by those whose properties are now valued at more than they were 5 or 10 years ago.
Yes.
And that also helps this idea of, well, we're all benefiting from this. Some actually look at it as a benefit. I'm happy that the house next door is $400,000 more expensive than mine, and I don't have a neighbor who I'm fighting all the time with.
I'm sure the new car dealers welcome it.
They definitely
I'm
do.
sure the restaurant owners welcome it. I'm sure Max Mara and Edward Chapman welcome it. I'm sure the new, what's its face from Seattle, it's going to open in a few weeks. Or did it open already? Did I miss it?
Not yet, no.
Okay. I'm sure they'll be very happy.
Well, but that's the problem. Yes. Here's a mayor who was elected as a dreamer. We're going to have the greenest city. We're going to deal with homelessness.
Yes.
You have this generation that has grown buying your hopes and dreams.
Yes.
And now they're asking you to help them take the
And
next
where can
stage
I
of
live?
their life.
Yeah.
And they don't see any action.
Gee, Mr. Mayor, I can cycle to work. The only problem is I can't live anywhere.
You're going to have to cycle from the suburbs.
Cycle from the suburbs. Okay, we'll take a breather on that note, folks. We'll stop on that note, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a number of other issues, including the federal election and the famous transit plebiscite. It hasn't disappeared. All the little elves, and they've hired thousands of them, are counting them and making sure they're real. Your opportunity to send us a note here on davidbernard.com, and the opportunity for those lovely people who support us to say hello here on Shaw Community Television Cable 4, back as soon as I sell my house.
This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. My new book about addictions, All the Way Home, Building Recovery That Works.
Our guest is Mario Canseco, the Vice President of Insights West, the polling company. You see Mario quite often in every media, but he's in the Vancouver Sun with a column regularly and on Global and so on. And our third visit with you. Thank you, Mario, for jumping in at the last minute. So, federal election, what are you hearing from people? I know what my impressions are, but let's hear what you're hearing.
A lot of disappointment with the federal Conservatives.
Yes.
And I think we see it as well in the number of candidates who have decided that they want to step down. The latest one, James Moore from Moody.
I put in a request to Mr. Moore to come and be on the program sometime over the summer. And at the moment, at least, he's declined. I'm sure he's busy and so on. But that is a statement. When you have the Peter MacKays and the James Moores jumping ship, with,
one good cover story or another, still it doesn't look good for the mothership.
Yeah, there's a difficulty, and if we go back to the way that they won their first majority mandate back in 2011, it was mostly on the basis of the urban centers that used to vote for the Liberal Party in a federal election and started to vote conservative. And I think they're seeing some of those ridings going maybe to the NDP this time, maybe to the Liberal Party. And without those ridings in the urban areas, especially that ring around Toronto, it's going to be very difficult for them to hold on to power. And if you go from a majority situation to even a minority with Stephen Harper as the head of government, the pressure on him to step down or to do something different from his own caucus and his own party is going to be monumental.
Yeah, and he probably won't.
Oh, no.
He is what he is.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, this is an interesting point. He is what he is, but so many people have spent so much energy of late demonizing the fellow and sort of Hitlerizing him, and I think that's sick. I don't see him as the world's most evil person or anything. I don't agree with all his policies and everything he does. And yes, he's done some things that are a little spooky, but which politician doesn't? Generally, I have to tell you, and I've never voted conservative, I've seen him as a reasonable manager of the government affairs.
Yeah. And on the finance file, that is where they do very well. Most people continue to see Harper as the best economic manager. We don't see Thomas Mulcair's numbers there. We definitely don't see Justin Trudeau's numbers there. And if you turn the campaign into a plebiscite on the economy and management, then he has a chance to stay.
Well, I know Mr. Harper watches this program assiduously, so you just gave him his campaign strategy. I remember seeing on the floor of Republican convention twice in history people cheering for Richard Nixon, and in each case my heart sank and I thought, I'm watching something I don't understand. And I have the same feeling when I see people get all dewy-eyed around Justin Trudeau.
Well, and
I don't get Justin Trudeau. I wouldn't trust him with a grocery store.
His numbers are tanking. And I think one of the reasons for that was the assumption that the Liberal Party, as the supposed naturally governing party of the country, was going to do very well on the strength of his name. And there's been a lot of disappointments, particularly in regards to the way that the Liberal Party voted on Bill C-51, the anti-terrorism bill. I think people may have been misjudging how Canadians would react to this. I mean, properly conducted polling has shown how upset people are with the way that this has been handled. And the Liberals probably thought, well, this is going to be forgotten in the next 4 or 5 months. Let's vote for it now, and then once we form the government, we change.
We'll do something different.
Which doesn't make any sense. And I think this is one of the reasons for them to look at Justin Trudeau and say, the odds are right. He's not ready to be Prime Minister.
No, I don't know that he ever will be. I don't know what to say about Mulcair. The guy, to me, is a mystery. He seems very academic, very formal, very staid, uptight, if I go that far.
And we see it in the way that the NDP is trying to actually portray him recently. He's sitting in a coffee shop, he has a small espresso in front of him, and he's talking about families.
Not buying it.
Well, but that's what they're selling. In the same way that the Conservatives are selling the idea of a man who has taken decisions in the past. Well, you're the incumbent. Of course,
that's what you have to do. Well, that's almost as bad as having Stephen Harper play the piano and trying to present himself as Johnny Carson. I mean, okay. Let's leave that election. Let's go to one of our favorite local issues, and that's transit. So I read just recently that they did hire another 200 million munchkins who are now busily, going through every little plebiscite vote and checking to make sure everybody got their fingerprints and did everything right. Okay. So eventually we should know what this thing said. And then what?
Well, I think Plan B is the option, and I think we see it from the statements that we've been exposed to over the past couple of weeks by the mayors themselves. Linda Hebner in Surrey always said that she had a Plan B, and I think this is one of the reasons for the plebiscite to be particularly unpopular in Surrey. If you're a Surrey voter, and your mayor has already said that she'll do this regardless, why would you vote to give yourself a tax hike?
And not only that, her Plan B is above ground rapid rail, right?
Yes.
Which I would favor, you know. And then this morning, oddly enough, knowing that we were going to talk about this, Moonbeam came out with he's got a plan B, and he's going to build a subway to UBC.
Yeah. Which is exactly what was supposed to happen. See, what I don't get about this,
Yes.
we have a ship that is leaking oil
Yes.
close to the city,
Yes.
and there's all of these pronouncements and all of these discussions
Yes.
and all of this fire in the belly.
Yes.
Where was that? When the premier of the province told the cities, the municipalities in Metro Vancouver, we're doing this because I want to. Nobody did anything. We didn't see any letters. We essentially were thrown into a situation where they knew that this was probably unwinnable. And they decided to go through with it regardless. And now, even before all the votes are counted, we're talking about a plan B. So it didn't make any sense.
Okay, so let's try and be smarter than we usually are. So what I'm hearing you say, without saying it, is actually this was a strategy to start with. In other words, was this $6 million or $10 million falderall, this waste of time plebiscite, was it all just a sort of tap dance to lead us to the plan Bs?
It might be, because otherwise we wouldn't be talking about this at this stage. And I mean, one of the problems that I see with this campaign is when they came in and showed the ballot that they wanted to use. To me, that is the number one issue. The ballot that the mayors presented to the BC government was very thorough. It said there's a subway going to UBC. It said there's light rail to Surrey. And then when the government took the ballot and changed it and said rapid transit, which could mean anything. It
Yes.
could mean a
Yeah,
train.
it could mean roller skates. It could be
teleportation machine from the fly.
Yes,
I mean,
yeah.
If you don't explain what this is,
Yes.
then how am I going to say yes to this? We saw it in our own polling. In November and December, the yes was ahead. And then when they were exposed to the ballot that was going to be used, they said, I don't think so.
But I think that's a wonderful, clever ploy. What we'll do is we'll drive everyone crazy with a really annoying plebiscite, and we'll go for months and months with public talk about it, you know, and argue about the details of the plebiscite, and make it also onerous and unattractive that when it fails and we get to do Plan B and look like heroes.
Well, but this is fantastic for the premier of the province.
Yes.
She can say, this isn't my fault. The mayors botched this campaign. They were ahead at one point.
Yeah.
So whatever happens, if they win it, then she's a genius. Hey, I came up with the idea to do this properly. If they lose it, it's not her fault.
And speaking of her geniusness, did I read something, was it as recent as yesterday, that Premier Clark is not having a surge of popularity these days?
Well, and it's something that we've seen over the past few months.
Yes.
The numbers are starting to drop. The numbers for John Horgan are a little bit better than they used to be.
Yes.
There's still a lot of people who don't know who he is.
Yeah.
But what is interesting to me, looking at our own polling on this, is
Yes.
that the disenchantment is coming from Liberal voters who maybe are supportive of the BC Liberal Party on the economic file,
Yes.
but are incredibly disappointed with their behavior on education, on accountability particularly. And this is one of the reasons for the numbers to be low. Maybe you voted for the Liberals because you were afraid of an NDP government handling finances, but that doesn't mean that you endorse everything they've done, which on those two files
I think
has been
so.
terrible.
I think so many people, and you and I are part of this group, are deeply offended by the mishandling of the file on the firing of the health workers, the health researchers, which resulted in one man's suicide, and shaming and humiliation for several others.
Well, and I think the saddest part of this is this culture that we have from the government in Victoria of doing everything orally. There's
Yes.
no paper. I mean, you had Bob Mackin here, who is a brilliant journalist and a guy
Yeah,
who,
yeah.
you know, if we had 5 or 6 more than that,
Yeah,
Bob
yeah,
Mackins,
yeah.
things would be very different.
Right.
But it's also that mentality. There's this assumption that you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, is it just my own perception? But I haven't felt her presence a lot in recent months. Is she deliberately sort of? I mean, she loves to be campaigning and be out there, but she seems to have deliberately chosen to be a bit in the weeds these days.
Well, and the moment that they chose to bring her out was the On the Bridge fiasco. You announced that you're going to be closing Burrard Bridge for a yoga thing, then your sponsors pull out, then you decide that this is politicized, which was quite strange to me. I mean, to watch the premier of BC saying that the event has become politicized. It's like watching a doctor say, I'm going to step away from this surgery, it's become too medical. I mean, of course it's going to be politicized. You are the politician. You are the one who is turning this into something that is going to be helping you. It's not helping you anymore, then you walk away.
We have about a minute and a half left. Speaking of polls, has anyone considered asking all of the doctors in BC how they feel about a substance that is basically used to party being called medical?
Well, what's fascinating about this is there's a high level of support, especially in the idea of marijuana.
Yes.
I mean, Canadians tend to support legalization.
Right.
But we don't agree on what the legalization should look like. Are we thinking about selling it like we sell scotch at the liquor store?
Yeah.
Or are we thinking about doing something different? And the fact that we have so many levels of government who aren't talking to each other and implementing laws that overlap or fight is not making any sense.
Yeah, I'd really be interested to see how doctors feel about this.
Pot,
Everybody knows we're all blinking. We all know 99% of all the people who buy allegedly medical marijuana are just buying it to get high, which is fine. That's their business. Go ahead.
But why are we pretending it's something else?
Well, Mike Hager, who used to be my colleague at The Sun, now he's at the Globe and Mail, went through some of the medical dispensaries and wrote about his experience, not even seeing a doctor or seeing a doctor who prescribed. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. This is not the way that those types of substances are supposed to be handled or sold.
I was going to go into a whole satire, but
I'd be thrown off the air if I did it. Mario, always great to see you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, David.
Next week is July 1st, Canada Day, so I believe the studio will be closed. At least I'm not going to show up. So we're going to do a rerun of a show we did ages ago, about something or other about seniors. But it was a good one. Two ladies come and tell us how we can do more to help. And after that, our buddy Wilbur Kelsick will talk about corruption at the highest levels in sport, including, of course, FIFA. Thanks for being with us here today on Shaw Community Television Cable 4. Good night.